Thanks everybody for being here today. I appreciate you coming out and observing my session. So really excited and honored to be here. There are some incredible presentations. I want to tell you a little bit about my background, kind of how I arrived here on this stage with XTN Cognitive Security. So XTN is headquartered in northern Italy, and we're in the fraud risk management business. So we'll get more into that. I'll kind of tell you a little bit about myself. So prior to joining XTN, I worked for another much larger three-letter cybersecurity company. I don't think they're here today, but I'm not gonna say the name. So, at any rate, 7 years in inside sales. So I'm based in the Boston area. Actually, really lucky to have made it here. I got in at I think 1 o'clock this morning. My flight was delayed. There are storms in Boston. So I'm married. I have 3 children. They have no school today, so my wife is home with all 3 kids, and she's not so happy with me. I'll tell you a little bit about my background. So prior to getting into cybersecurity sales, I actually was in debt collection. So I worked under contract for several years for the U.S. Department of Education, and then eventually with a partner opened up a boutique collection agency focused on collecting sort of zombie debt, old payday loans and that sort of thing. So there's an interesting analogy that I'd like to draw. Oh, I'm sorry. There's an interesting analogy that I'd like to draw between my experience with debt collection and phishing. So the two industries are actually remarkably similar. First of all, you have a call center that's outfitted with phones and computers, and you've got people who are incentivized for getting in contact with you and making you give them information. Whether in the debt collection industry, it's a payment, right? They're trying to get you to repay your obligation on a good or a service that you've already received. So this is a challenge, and they're armed with tools like your credit report. So if you don't answer your call, they can call your mother's house, they can call relatives and things like that. Similarly, though, the phishing call center also has a lot of tools at their disposal. They've got information that could have been taken from a previous breach. In a lot of cases, they know already that you're a customer of XYZ Bank. And that's going to be the example that we'll talk through today. Really, though, that's kind of where the similarities end. The debt collector is motivated by compensation, right? By commission. They're making a small hourly wage, and they're compensated fairly well for getting in touch with you and having you repay your obligation. Similarly, the phishing call center, though, is having similar structures and commission payouts and incentives for those representatives to trick you, to socially engineer you into giving up information, into allowing them access to your bank account. So it doesn't actually even have to be just a bank account. It can be any digital service. So I know we're in Washington, D.C., and we've got a lot of government agencies and entities here. So the story that I'm going to tell specifically is about online banking, but just kind of think about it in the context of it's a digital service that you're offering to an end user. So I want to talk a little bit more about the goals of phishing. So I'm going to start by just trying to bring up the energy a little bit, and I'm going to survey the audience. Now, I know you're here with your peers and your colleagues, and you might not want to admit whether you've been a victim of fraud or a phishing attack, but just a quick show of hands. How many people here have received a call or an email, someone purporting to be from their bank or from some company that they do legitimate business with? How many people have been a target of a phishing campaign? So almost everybody here. Now, I'm going to see less hands on this next question. How many people have been a victim? How many people have actually been phished, actually clicked on the link? And don't be afraid to admit it. I know we're here with your peers and your colleagues. We're all security professionals. And this is kind of a key point of the presentation. And just kind of keep it in the back of your mind. We're security professionals. In some cases, lawyers, chief information security officers, government employees. We go through corporate mandated security compliance training on an annual basis, some cases on a quarterly basis. How many people have clicked the link on a phishing campaign that ended up being from your internal IT security? At my previous job, one of my peers who managed a team of cybersecurity sales representatives, he actually did click the link. Fortunately, it was from our internal IT security, and the consequences were he had to go through some retraining, and he was the butt end of just about every joke for, well, the better part of a year now. In real life, though, the consequences are much, much more severe. So we know that everybody here has been a target. Nobody here is willing to admit if they've been a victim. How many people have had a family member who's had their bank accounts accessed fraudulently, have funds drained out of their account? Right? Now we're willing to admit it. It's not us, it's our family. It wasn't me, it was them. So we're able to admit it. The fact is, though, that we're all targets. There are phishing campaigns going on around the clock, right? These call centers, they're moving to the United States. They, historically had been overseas. You were able to sniff them out if you were security conscious because you'd recognize, the accent was foreign and you weren't going to have that conversation on your cell phone or the phone number, didn't look authentic. Well, all of that has been, it's becoming quite a bit more sophisticated. The call can look like it's coming from your bank, from a company that you're legitimately doing business with. It's easy enough now for them to mask that number on the cell phone. The voice, it's going to come through and it's going to be clear and confident, and it's going to perfectly mimic the interactions that you might normally have with that enterprise that you're doing business with. So to understand the motivation of phishing, it's pretty straightforward, right? They need to trick you. They want to get your information. They already have some information. They want to get more information so that they can weaponize that data. Now, they're going to exfiltrate data, or ideally, it's going to be dollars. And that's going to come kind of right out of your bank account. So those are the motivations of phishing. And I want to talk a little bit about the pervasiveness of phishing and why it's relevant today, not only for banks. Right? So I've got a stat here from Verizon Data Breach Report. Really, as long as I've been reading the Verizon Data Breach Report, which is not very long, phishing has been there, it's been popular, and I don't anticipate that it's going anywhere. And the reason is because it continues to be successful. There are guys making an incredible amount of money running phishing call centers. And it's really hard to think about. If my career in cybersecurity sales doesn't work out, with my background in debt collection and in security sales, I think I probably could open up a call center for phishing. So potentially that could be a good angle for me. It isn't going away. It's getting more sophisticated. So let's talk a little bit about who's at risk. We've kind of already established that everybody in the room is a target, and some of you may have already been victims. I like to think about the more vulnerable targets. For example, there's my dad who holds his iPhone flat in his palm and types with one finger. For sure, he's not using Department of Defense standards for his password when he logs in to access your digital service. There might be a capital letter in there. I can guarantee you there's no special character. Right? So I think about my dad as the perfect example. On his iPhone 6, he hasn't updated the operating system. You can't expect, we're security professionals. You can't expect your end users to be security professionals. They're not. They're typical everyday users. And there are populations that are much, much more vulnerable than others. I think about elderly people, right? Everybody has probably heard about the grandson scheme where they call and say that your loved one has been in a car accident or caused some type of damage, and essentially it's extortion, right? But it's extortion done fairly tastefully, done fairly professionally and effectively. Elderly people are at risk. There's no question about that. I sat in recently on a presentation done by a woman with the state of Massachusetts, Office of Consumer Affairs, and she was talking about populations that are exceptionally at risk. For example, in the gateway cities of Massachusetts, there's populations of migrant workers, populations of immigrants who are in the process of becoming naturalized, or in the process of getting their green card and becoming legitimate. Well, they're being extorted. They're being targeted and extorted because they don't speak the language, they don't understand the processes, and they're being victimized. And so elderly people and vulnerable communities, children, right? a social security number, I was reading recently, a social security number for a child, right, a complete data set on the dark web sells for about 10 times more than an adult because of how much more valuable it is. So even children are at risk. State employees, government employees, everyone can be tricked. And we're really busy, right? We've got a lot going on. We've got multiple devices, and we've got emails and calls and text messages coming in. And it's really not unrealistic to think that even as security professionals, right, even with a background in annual corporate mandated training and all this information thrown at us constantly, we're still susceptible to be tricked, right? And all it takes is that one convincing voice and that right angle, and you're going to be a victim as well. So really, it's everyone who's at risk. So we talked about a couple of examples, the grandson scheme and the extortion of vulnerable communities. I want to tell a story, though, about a really convincing phishing exploit that's happening right now in the wild. And it starts off with a phone call, like I had said before, and it looks like it's coming from your bank's fraud operations center. Now, it's important to note that this threat actor, this fraudster, is operating from a list, right? That's probably from an earlier breach. They have your name, they have your cell phone number, and they have a pretty strong indication that you're a customer with the bank that you do banking with. So just to kind of set the stage. So your phone's going to ring. Hi, this is Anthony. Hi, Anthony, this is Anthony, and I'm calling from your bank's fraud operations center. So here we go. Okay, Anthony, what's going on? How can I help you? We just noticed that there's a transaction on your debit account coming from Istanbul, Turkey. It's over $500, and we wanted to just get in touch with you and find out whether or not that transaction is legitimate. So I'm scrambling here thinking, nope, haven't been in Turkey recently, haven't bought anything online recently that could have been transacted through Turkey. So no, it's definitely fraud. Let's go ahead and block that transaction. Okay, great, Anthony. Glad that we're going to be able to help you. Just one thing I need to verify before I'm able to help. Can you just tell me your user ID? Now, I hear some laughs in the audience. As security professionals, probably our guard's going to be up. Maybe we're not going to give them that user ID, but I'll ask you to reflect back on that typical user, on an elderly user, on my dad with his iPhone 6 flat in his palm. He's going to give him that information because it's not his password, it's not his social security number, it's not something that he knows to protect, it's just a username, it should be fine. Well, you give them the username, right, because they need to verify your identity. Well, now you're going to get a buzz in your pocket. Mr. Cardoza, I just sent a one-time passcode to your phone, and I'm just going to use that to validate and block this transaction. So you're already off guard. They've established trust. They've already got you to give them a small bit of information. What's another little, this guy's, he's calling me, he's trying to help me. Right, so I give him the one-time passcode. Great, so we block that transaction, and now we know that your password, your PIN has been compromised, so we want to help you to reset that password. Again, I think that this is a legitimate call coming from my fraud operations center. So, hey, Mr. Cardozo, we're just going to send one more one-time passcode. If you could just read that off. What we'll do is set it up so that next time you log in, you'll be able to reset your username and password, right? And that's it. You thank the person for calling. Thank you for blocking the transaction. You hang up the phone thinking that, great, my bank is there. They're actively protecting me against fraud. Even if my information is compromised from some other vendor, my bank's got my back. I don't have to worry about it. Well, let's see what actually just happened. So when they asked for the user ID, they had a web application, a mobile application pulled up in front of them, and they were using the password reset flow. So they asked for your user ID, which was the first piece of information they needed for the password reset flow. Then that request pinged you with a one-time passcode. Now, that request was just a number via SMS, which was not a secure channel, and we're not going to get too much into, it's been 5 or 7 years that NIST has recommended against the use of SMS for one-time passcodes. We're all still doing it anyway. So that was the password reset functionality. The first one-time passcode gave them access to your account. They took your user ID, they took the one-time passcode, they just changed your password and logged in. So the next thing that they're going to do is, again, perfectly mimicking the interaction of your fraud operations center. The next thing that they're going to do is validate some legitimate transactions. So they've gained access to your bank account using the password reset flow. And now they're going to look at, okay, Anthony, I see here $42.99 at your town gas station, $17.99 at your town pizza. Are those also fraudulent, or are those legitimate transactions? Right? Again, building that trust. The second one-time passcode is an outbound wire transfer that you're approving. So they've reset your password, they've gained access to your account, they've tricked you into giving them not only your user ID, but 2 one-time passcodes. And by the time the call is over, your bank account has been completely drained. So I know some of you are probably thinking, oh, this could never happen to me. But again, I'll remind you that for the most part, we're all security professionals in this room. We've gone through the corporate compliance training. We've had the experience, we've read the Verizon data breach report. Let's reflect back on, folks that we know, my dad, your dad, people that we know who are going to be tricked, who are likely to be tricked. Ultimately, if you're offering a digital service, you have to know that the user is the weakest link. The device, think about our devices are filthy. I've got 2 different devices. I've got an iPhone, which is my work phone. I've got an Android, which is my personal device. The iPhone is patched and up to date on the latest versions because when I don't update it, I get a ping from my CTO saying, hey, Anthony, it's been 2 days since the update came out, and you still haven't updated your device. So that one is great. That one is secure. My personal device, my Android, I honestly, I couldn't even tell you the last time I updated the operating system. It's a S9. Anytime I do the update, the phone starts acting up, and so I don't bother. And I know better than that because I've been in cybersecurity sales for 7 years. So I know how important it is. I know how important patch management is to the enterprise. I know how important it is for me to maintain a good security posture, right, especially for those companies that I'm interacting with their digital services. But I don't do it, and the typical user doesn't do it. I mean, Again, I keep going back to the example of my dad. There's absolutely no way that his iPhone 6 is on the most current version. There's no way that he's doing it. I mean, I think about, there are global 2,000, Fortune 500 even companies that struggle with patch management and vulnerability management. They can't keep up with it. There's so many devices and so many updates coming out. The velocity is nauseating. If Fortune 500 companies can't do patch management and vulnerability management well, we can't expect that typical end users of our digital services are going to do that well. They're just not. So what went wrong in that scenario? Well, first and foremost, there were no alarms. So when that threat actor was accessing the web application and using the password reset flow, well, the first fault, I would say, is on the part of the bank or the enterprise offering the digital service. And here's why. That request was coming from an unrecognized location, from a device or a browser that had never, ever been used before. I think about the risks involved in that scenario, and probably it shouldn't be super convenient to reset a password from overseas. It shouldn't be really convenient for me to reset a password from a device that I've never used, from a public Wi-Fi or a location that I've never been to before. So that part, I'm going to blame on the bank or the enterprise offering the digital service. From there, it's human error, right? And this is always the case, right? And you can have all the technologies in the world, but humans are still going to make errors. They're going to take their multi-factor authenticator and they're going to change it to a fixed passcode. Right, and there are probably administrators in your organization who are mandated to use strong authentication, but have changed it on the back end so that they're using a fixed passcode, essentially a second password, and really not doing what you were intending it to do. You're paying a lot of money for multi-factor authentication, and they're sidestepping around it. Human error, again, is always going to be the center of it. You need to kind of establish it. It's like any relationship, right? You have to set boundaries, you have to set expectations up front, because if you don't, there's going to be problems. So in this case, the user didn't know that the bank would never ask for their username to log into the web application. Had they been told that during registration, had they been hit with an ongoing awareness training, maybe we could have stopped it, but still, probably not. Users are going to be tricked, right? There's that grandparent scheme. If the person on the other end of the phone is convincing enough, they're going to get that information out of you. It's simply put, right? Users are tricked. We have so many things going on that we don't always have the time to kind of stop and investigate, right? And again, some of you are looking at me like, Anthony, there's no way I would be tricked. And I'd say, great, that's because you're a compliance attorney and you've been doing this for 20 years. That's why you wouldn't be tricked. Your typical user isn't a compliance attorney. They're just not. Your typical user isn't a CIO or even a government employee. So again, human error is always going to be central to phishing and to social engineering. The process wasn't transparent. So the one-time passcode, set aside that it shouldn't have been sent via SMS and probably should have come through a secure encrypted channel on your application. We'll set that aside. The one-time passcode didn't have any information with it. It was just a number that buzzed in your pocket. You're on the phone with somebody who's helping you to stop a fraudulent transaction, and they asked you for the number that just buzzed in your pocket, right? The timing, the cadence is all rehearsed, and if that one-time passcode simply had a message encoded, password reset, use this code to validate your password reset, that's another opportunity for the user to step up and say, hey, listen, you know what, or just hang up the phone. One of the things that I like to do is when they call, there's one that goes around for insurance, open enrollment, and press 1 for open enrollment and insurance. Another one, they're offering you've qualified for a reduced interest rate on your credit card. Great, sign me up for that. So, I take the call, and so first they're going to ask some innocuous information, right? How much in debt do you have? It almost sounds like a credit counselor, again, somebody trying to help you, somebody establishing and building trust. How much in debt do you have? Which is it, MasterCard or Visa on the card? Okay, well, Mr. Cardozo, we want you to qualify for this reduced interest rate. You've been a great customer, right? You've always made your payments on time. We're going to bring your interest rate down from 12 to 6 on your credit card. Awesome, that sounds great for me. I've got some debt on my card. I definitely would benefit from a reduced rate. Great, well, all I need is just the first 4 digits of your card, and then the expiration date, the subsequent 12 digits of the card, and don't forget the 3-digit code on the back. Now again, we're kind of smirking here, thinking like, well, not me, Anthony, they're not going to trick me. Again, you're a security professional. You're the ones that they're not going to trick. We've got to reflect back on that typical average user. And if you hook somebody, and think about somebody that might have $10, $12, $15, $20,000 in credit card debt, if you tell them that they can cut their interest rate in half, they're probably going to be interested in taking that call. And there's probably a good chance that you're going to get some information out of them. So we'll talk a little bit about how we would go about, how XTN might go about stopping that type of fraudulent attack. The first one, like I said, is communication on the forefront. This isn't something that we do specifically, but something that we encourage and something that we enable with our SDK integration with your mobile application. So again, really, really important when you're starting out a relationship to set boundaries and to level set on expectations. So in this case, your digital users should know that you'll never ever ask them for your username, and you certainly would never ask them for a one-time passcode. And that's going to help, but it's not going to prevent that type of attack. It's going to mitigate the risk a little bit. Education, it can't only be during enrollment, during onboarding, right? Your interactions with your end users have to be on an ongoing basis. And perhaps it would make sense that if there is this type of more sophisticated threat going on and you've had customers impacted, perhaps you should have an awareness campaign and interact with those other users and talk to them about, hey, here's what's happening. Right? And the state of Massachusetts does a really great job with this. I've been talking to like Council on Aging, and they go out and give information to the elderly. They say, here are the scams that are going on today. Here are the calls that your friends and peers are receiving, and just give a little bit of education about how you might be able to stop that. It's not enough, so you need technology. And so what we do is using both supervised and unsupervised machine learning. We build out a robust profile of a typical and authentic, legitimate user's behavior so that we can use that sort of data set, use that information and insight to spot out those anomalies, to spot out those fraudsters. So again, when that fraudster was trying to access the password reset flow from an unrecognized location and an unrecognized device, you would receive an alert through a secure encrypted channel on your mobile phone, and you would simply just press no. Or you're attempting to reset your password from Turkey or from North Korea, wherever it may be. You just press no, and the transaction's going to be blocked. The attempt's going to be blocked. And then there's behavioral biometrics and passive behavioral biometrics. So you think about sort of the relationship between security and convenience. And historically, you've been able to have either a secure digital service or you've had a convenient digital service, and it really was hard to have both. Two-factor authentication is a great tool for mitigating access and authentication risk. End users hate it. They hate it. It's terrible. It takes too long to log in. And I think about, I unfortunately am a millennial, and I think about, my peers and other, they can't be bothered with it. They're going to go somewhere else, and if your service is too difficult to use, they're going to go to your competitor's service, and they're going to find another way around. So it's really important that you only challenge the end users when the risk level is appropriate. So that scenario where unrecognized device, unrecognized location, well, yeah, probably we want to step up and ask for a fingerprint, ask for a retina scan, ask for some additional level or layer of authentication. If I'm logging in from my device on my home network, doing a typical transaction, not doing anything totally unusual, maybe I sent $50 to my brother. He's hard up this week, so I'm gonna send him on Zelle. I'm gonna send him $50. That's a typical transaction, and my profile is going to indicate that that's something that I do regularly. I access that service. It's Friday afternoon. It's payday. I'm going to send $50 to my brother. That's a typical transaction. If the next transaction is $10,000 to an account that I've never sent it to, probably a fingerprint or a retina scan or even, we've got an integration with YubiKey, even a hardware authenticator there could be interesting for non-repudiation and for transaction signing. Because again, I'm sending $50 every couple of weeks to my brother. I'm not sending $10,000, and that's an anomalous transaction based on my previous behavior. So we want to challenge that. We want to step that up, but only when the risk is appropriate. So I know I'm short on time here. I want to talk quickly through use case. We're in Washington, D.C., and there's probably not so many bankers here in the room, probably more folks affiliated with the government space. So we do work in the government space as well. We have a customer today. There's a local government with around 40,000 citizens. Now, they also have a big influx in the summer of tourists, and those tourists in some cases are interacting with point-of-sale systems that are belonging to the city, namely parking. We're also doing transaction monitoring with respect to digital services that the government's offering. So you can pay your tax bill or excise tax or property tax bill. You can pay that online. And so this is offering that additional layer of visibility and security. And I really think it's important for governments to build trust. And offering digital services is a really good way to interact with citizens, a good way to have more information, and a good way to really grow the offerings, right, that the city has. They're going to do that digitally, but they can't do that if the services are vulnerable, and they certainly can't do that if the end users are not maintaining a good security posture. And again, your end users are not all security professionals. For the most part, they're a lot more, like the elderly. They're a lot more, like my dad with the old iPhone. And they're not following Department of Defense standards. So a little bit about our platform. We've got in-app protection where we're able to, for example, block keystroke loggers and screen grabbers, things like that. Again, I think about that kind of zombie device. Maybe you don't have two devices, a work and a personal. Maybe you don't have that segregation of duties there, and it's all on the same phone. Again, we can't expect our end users to be efficient with patch management. They're just not going to do it. We also can't expect that their devices are going to be. Are they downloading apps from outside of the Google Play or iOS store? Well, now it actually doesn't even matter, right? How many applications are removed from the Google Play Store or the iOS store on a weekly, monthly basis? You can download applications through legitimate channels and still be subject to malware, screen scrapers, keystroke loggers, reverse engineering of your application, right? Your end user's device is intimately linked to their identity, which is important for you if you're offering a digital service. But frankly, the device is filthy, right? Our phones are disgusting. We take them into the bathroom with us. We use them on public Wi-Fi. They're really not secure devices. There's no question about that. So digital identity, like I said, is really intimately linked to the device, and the person are one and the same. Right? And if somebody gets their hands on my phone and I don't have a good security posture, maybe I don't have a biometric screen lock or a multi-step password, that's it. As soon as somebody has access to that unlocked device, they can get into pretty much everything else from there. And we know that, again, users don't have good security habits, so probably they're recycling passwords. Probably, if you gain access to their Gmail account, you're going to get into their Facebook account and LinkedIn from there. LinkedIn, here's a great example. They still are using SMS authentication. They have two different mobile apps, but none of them have a secure encrypted channel for strong authentication. They're still using SMS. And this is a massive, massive company. And so the last thing that we do is fraud protection, like I said, transaction signing and monitoring, kind of squarely focused today in the banking space, but there are just so many applications. Automotive, I think about automotive, and even in the government space, right? Fraud prevention for your constituents, for your end users is really critical. And it's something that if it isn't important today and you want to offer digital services, it needs to be something that's in focus for the future. So I'm way over time here, so I'll just bring up on the screen our three products. SEEP is endpoint, visibility into unmanaged devices, and building the behavioral profile for the end user. Smart authentication, so this is your smart multi-factor authentication, consumer grade, and like I said, matches the transaction monitoring product. So I'll be over at the expo floor here for the rest of the afternoon, and if you'd like to find out more, schedule a demo, would love to have you come and visit the booth.
That's great. Thank you, Anthony. Give Anthony a big round of applause.